We're live from New Delhi. You're watching DD India Live, India's voice to the world. I'm Lipakshi Khurana, coming up in the next 30 minutes. US President Donald Trump threatens Iran with death, fire and fury if it disrupts shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran Guard says they will determine the end on 11th day of the conflict. Oil prices continue to swing wildly. Trump weighs steps to ease oil prices, including Russia sanctions relief. G7 decides on necessary measures at emergency meeting. Indian government directs oil refineries to increase LPG production, sets up committee to review allocations for hotels and industries. And on to the details now. Donald Trump on Monday said that he had a very good call with Russian President Vladimir Putin about Ukraine and the conflict in the Middle East.
I had a very good call with President Putin. We had a lot of people on the line from our side, from his side. We were talking about Ukraine, which is just a never-ending fight. And look, there's tremendous hatred between President Putin and President Zelensky. They can't seem to get it together. But I think it was a positive call on that subject. And we obviously talked then about the Middle East. And he wants to be helpful.
Well, as per the Kremlin foreign policy aide Yuri Ushakov, the two leaders spoke for about an hour. After Trump initiated the call, he said Putin shared proposals aimed at reaching a quick settlement to the conflict involving Iran during the conversation.
A phone conversation took place this evening between the presidents of Russia and the United States. Donald Trump called Vladimir Putin to discuss a number of extremely important issues related to the current international situation. The focus naturally was on Iran conflict and on the US participated trilateral talks on the Ukrainian settlement. I should say straight away that the conversation was substantive, frank and constructive, as is usually the case in the dialogue between the Russian and US leaders.
Well, further, he also mentioned that Trump shared his view of the situation, particularly regarding the ongoing US-Israel military operation.
The Russian president set out a number of considerations aimed at the swift political and diplomatic settlement of the Iran conflict, taking into account the contacts held with leaders of the Persian Gulf states, with Iran's president Pezeshkian, and with the heads of several other countries. In turn, the US president gave his assessment of developments in context of the ongoing US-Israel operation.
Well, US President Donald Trump stated on Monday that the US will intensify actions against Iran and would go further and further, while assuring that military operations would end very soon, helping stabilize turbulent markets amid the escalating West Asian conflict.
We could call it a tremendous success right now as we leave here. I could call it, or we could go further, and we're going to go further. But the big risk on that war has been over for 3 days. We wiped them out in the first 2 days.
Well, following the appointment of Mujtaba Khamenei, son of the assassinated Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, as Iran's new supreme leader, Tehran unleashed missile and drone barrages on Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Israel and even Turkey, intercepted by NATO defenses. Iran maintains the Strait of Hormuz blockade, halting most tanker traffic and driving benchmark crude to highs before a partial retreat. Wall Street turned positive on Trump's short-term excursion remarks after over 5,000 targets were struck. France is leading defensive efforts to reopen the vital choke point post-conflict peak, while Russia has vowed unwavering support to Iran amid regional rallies and intensifying Hezbollah clashes in Lebanon. And in a response, U.S. President Donald Trump issued a forceful warning on Truth Social, threatening that any Iranian action to halt oil flow through the Strait of Hormuz would trigger an overwhelming American response. He stated Iran would be struck 20 times harder than previous attacks and that the United States would destroy easily destroyable targets to render Iran's rebuilding virtually impossible as a nation. Trump described the potential devastation as death, fire and fury while expressing hope it would not occur. He framed the U.S. military capability as a gift to China and other major oil importers reliant on the strait, urging appreciation for America's protective role amid the escalating West Asia conflict. Meanwhile, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC, has declared that Iran alone will determine the end of the ongoing war, rejecting U.S. President Donald Trump's claims of imminent victory and demands for unconditional surrender. Well, Brigadier General Qiyamaz Haidari, Deputy Commander of Qatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters, warned that if U.S. and Israeli attacks persist, Tehran will block even 1 liter of oil from leaving the region. He vowed unrelenting retaliatory strikes and designated all American military bases across West Asia as legitimate targets, signaling Tehran's resolve to impose its will despite heavy losses and the prolonged regional crisis. And Israel announced on Tuesday that it had destroyed an Iranian missile launcher minutes after Tehran launched a fresh barrage. The Israeli Defense Forces reported successfully intercepting most incoming projectiles, with no casualties reported. In response, Israeli warplanes carried out a precise strike on the launcher responsible for the attack. The incident followed Israel's second large-scale assault on Tehran early on Monday, described by the IDF as a broad wave of strikes targeting Iranian military infrastructure amid the intensifying West Asian conflict that began late February. Well, Iran also launched fresh strikes on energy installations in the Gulf on Monday, including a petroleum complex in Bahrain, as oil prices soared on fears over supply disruptions due to the West Asian conflict. Bahrain's sprawling Al Ma'amir oil facility was hit, causing a fire and damage, with the country's state-owned energy firm Bapco declaring force majeure, the latest Gulf producer to activate the legal clause. Energy producers in Qatar and Kuwait earlier made similar declarations, which are a warning that events beyond their control may lead them to miss export targets. Also, Bapco Energy's Kingdom of Bahrain's integrated energy company declared force majeure situation on the group's operations. The company said in a statement it hereby serves notice of force majeure on its group operations, which have been affected by the ongoing regional conflict in the West Asia and the recent attack on its refinery complex. Well, the United Arab Emirates announced early on Tuesday that its air defense system successfully intercepted and destroyed a combined missile and drone attack launched from Iran. The UAE armed forces stated that multiple projectiles were neutralized before reaching national territory, with no casualties or damage reported. The interception occurred as Iran continued retaliatory strikes across the Gulf in response to ongoing U.S. and Israeli military operations. This marks the latest direct Iranian assault on a Gulf Arab state since the conflict intensified in late February. UAE officials have reaffirmed their commitment to defending sovereignty while calling for de-escalation to protect regional stability and global energy security. And Iraqi air defense forces successfully intercepted and destroyed an unmanned aerial vehicle approaching Baghdad International Airport late on Monday. The drone was shot down several kilometers from the runway, preventing any threat to civilian or military aviation. No casualties or damage have been reported after the incident that occurred amid heightened regional tensions following Iran's missile and drone attacks on Gulf states and UK bases. Iraqi authorities have not yet identified the drone's origin or operator, but sources suggest possible links to ongoing proxy activities in the escalating West Asia conflict. Baghdad airport operations have resumed normally after a brief airspace restriction. An investigative group, Bellingcat, released analysis on Sunday showing a 3-second video clip geolocated to the site of a bombed school in Minab, southern Iran, that killed over 165 people, mostly children, on the 28th of February. Well, the researcher, Trevor Ball, identified the falling munition as a U.S. exclusive Tomahawk cruise missile, contradicting President Donald Trump's claim that Iran caused the explosion. Well, the satellite imagery and expert reviews indicate the school was hit during rapid U.S. strikes on an adjacent Revolutionary Guard base. The Pentagon has launched a civilian harm assessment while Israel denies involvement in the incident. Also, smoke drifted over Beirut's southern suburbs on Tuesday as the war between Israel and the Iran-backed Lebanese group Hezbollah entered its 11th day. Escalating hostilities have forced nearly 700,000 people to flee their homes in Lebanon in the past week, according to a United Nations agency. Lebanon was drawn deeper into the West Asia conflict after Hezbollah launched attacks to avenge the killing of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, prompting an Israel offensive that has killed nearly 500 people, with about 100 deaths reported daily. The Israeli military has recently ordered evacuations from the southern suburbs of Beirut, much of South Lebanon, and parts of the eastern Bekaa Valley, areas considered strongholds of Hezbollah. Well, UN Chief Antonio Guterres' office warned on Monday of serious environmental consequences from recent strikes on oil facilities and desalination plants in the Middle East, saying they pose significant threats to air quality and drinking water. UN spokesperson Stephen Dujarric said the organization was continuing to raise the alarm as civilian casualties rise and damage spreads to essential services. UN spokesperson Dujarric emphasized that all precautions must be taken to protect civilians and essential infrastructure during hostilities.
We continue to raise the alarm over the humanitarian impact of escalating violence across parts of the Middle East, which is driving rising civilian casualties, damage to civilian infrastructure, and growing displacement of people. We're particularly concerned by the number of reports of recent strikes on oil facilities, which could have serious environmental consequences across the region, with immediate possible impacts on safe water, on air that people need to breathe, and on food. We reiterate again that all possible precautions must be taken to protect civilians from the impact of hostilities and to avoid damage to health facilities, schools, water systems, and other essential infrastructure.
And still to come in this edition of DT India Live. Bangladesh rations fuel, Pakistan cuts energy use as West Asia conflict drives oil prices fear. Voicing concern on safeguarding economic rights of landlocked Afghanistan, India comes down heavily on trade and transit terrorism in a veiled reference to Pakistan at UNSC.
Jharkhand will mesmerize you with majestic nature, rich heritage, and colorful culture.
Johar. Johar. It fits perfectly.
Thank you.
Full workout ho gaya.
Ready?
Postcards from Jharkhand on National Geographic.
Welcome back. You're watching DT India Live. I'm Lipakshi Kuran, and moving on, retail fuel prices in Sri Lanka have increased after a revision by the state-owned Ceylon Petroleum Corporation came into effect from Tuesday. The new pricing structure has raised fuel cost by around 7 to 8%, with an increase of at least 24 rupees per litre across the island. The revision comes amid volatility in global oil markets due to tensions in the Middle East, which have pushed crude prices above $100 per barrel. The move is part of ongoing efforts by Sri Lanka to stabilize its finances following the severe economic crisis in 2022. Also, Bangladesh has introduced fuel rationing as the West Asia conflict worsens the energy crunch in the import-dependent nation. The Bangladesh Petroleum Corporation has limited fuel sales for most vehicles after attacks on Iran by the US and Israel, and Tehran's retaliatory strikes across the Gulf raised fears of supply disruptions. Bangladesh imports nearly 95% of its oil and gas needs. Authorities have also capped fuel purchases for several vehicles after panic buying and hoarding led to long queues at fuel stations across the country. While Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif said schools would close for 2 weeks and announced sweeping cuts to government fuel use and spending on Monday, he said the measures are aimed at controlling the situation arising out of surging oil prices triggered by the conflict with Iran, which are threatening to destabilize the economy. Also, under the new measures, all schools will close for 2 weeks from next week, while universities will shift to online classes immediately to reduce commuting. Government departments will face a 50% cut in fuel allowances for 2 months, and 60% of official vehicles, excluding buses and ambulances, will be taken off the road. Well, the Indian government has instructed oil refineries across the country to increase LPG production. The Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas announced on Monday that the additional output will be diverted to meet domestic household demand and help stabilize supply in the coming months. The ministry has prioritized domestic LPG supply to households and introduced 25-day interbooking period to avoid hoarding or black marketing. Non-domestic supplies from imported LPG is being prioritized to essential non-domestic sectors such as hospitals and educational institutions. For LPG supply to other non-domestic sectors, a committee of 3 executive directors of oil marketing companies have been constituted to review the representations for LPG supply to restaurants or hotels or other industries. And moving on, US has censured Afghanistan over its detention of American citizens, a move that could lead to a ban on US passport holders traveling to the country. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said in a statement that he was designating Afghanistan's Taliban government as a state sponsor of wrongful detention, demanding that Kabul release all US citizens detained in the country, including Mahmoud Habibi and Dennis Goyle. He added that the Taliban continues to use terrorist tactics, kidnapping individuals for ransom or to seek policy concessions. These despicable tactics need to end. The Secretary of State also said that he had concluded it was not safe for Americans to travel to the country because of the risk of being unjustly detained. Meanwhile, UN Security Council meeting on Afghanistan was held on Monday, where US Ambassador to the United Nations Mike Waltz said that the international assistance to the country should be evaluated given Taliban intransigence and its exclusion of the female population from basic rights. He noted that the budget for the United Nations assistance mission in Afghanistan, the mandate of which is up for renewal next week, is the largest of any special UN mission in the world.
In light of the Taliban's intransigence, we must carefully evaluate the utility of international assistance and engagement in Afghanistan. UNAMA's budget is the largest of any special political mission in the world, even after a reduction in its 2026 budget by 15%. This council must consider carefully the funds we collectively provide for this mission's budget when the mission's female national staff are not even able to go into the office to work.
And India's ambassador to the United Nations, P. Harish, also spoke at the UNSC meeting on Afghanistan. He strongly criticized what he termed as trade and transit terrorism in a veiled reference to Pakistan, as he urged the international community to safeguard the economic rights of landlocked Afghanistan. The envoy stressed that unhindered trade and transit are essential for Afghanistan's economic recovery, warning that obstructing these channels amounts to economic coercion against a vulnerable, landlocked, developing country.
The Secretary General's report also expresses deep concern at civilian casualties caused by cross-border armed violence. We reiterate and support the Secretary General's call urging compliance with obligations under international law including international humanitarian law and ensuring protection of civilians. India strongly condemns the airstrikes on Afghan territory, which are flagrant violations of international law and the UN Charter and the principle of state sovereignty. It's hypocritical to espouse high principles of international law and Islamic solidarity on the one hand, while mercilessly carrying out airstrikes during the holy month of Ramadan that have killed 185 innocent civilians as of 6th March, around 55% of whom are women and children, and displaced over 100,000 according to the UNAMA on the other. We also reiterate a grave concern on the practice of trade and transit terrorism by denial of passage for trade and the cynical closure of access for a landlocked country. UN declarations on LLDCs sound hollow in the face of such actions. The trade and transit vulnerabilities of LLDCs should not be weaponized.
Well, Prime Minister Narendra Modi extended warm greetings to the Central Industrial Security Force on its Raising Day on Tuesday via social media post. Sharing photographs of the CISF personnel, Prime Minister Modi highlighted the CISF's pivotal role in safeguarding airports, seaports, nuclear installations, industrial units and other strategic assets. The Prime Minister noted that the personnel's unwavering commitment significantly contributes to India's internal security and overall progress. The message comes as the paramilitary organization raised on the 10th of March 1969 continues to play a frontline role in maintaining law and order at vital establishments. Well, the 7th edition of the India-Japan Joint Military Exercise, Dharma Guardian 2026, concluded on Sunday in Chaubatia in Uttarakhand. The focused on counter-insurgency and counter-terrorism operations. A report.
The 7th edition of the India-Japan Joint Military Exercise, Dharma Guardian 2026, concluded on Sunday in Chaubatia in Uttarakhand, with the Indian Army affirming its commitment to strengthening defense cooperation with Japan amid rising global terrorism concerns. The bilateral exercise primarily focused on counter-insurgency and counter-terrorism operations. One of the key highlights was a validation drill named Asahi Shakti, a 48-hour field training exercise designed to simulate real-world terrorist threat scenarios in the Chaubatia region. The drill involved terrain analysis, the establishment of a company operating base, intelligence gathering through patrols and ambushes, cordon and search operations, special heliborne operations, room intervention and hostage rescue drills.
Through this joint training exercise, we have demonstrated our unwavering commitment to combat terrorism, a global menace that threatens the peace and security globally. Together, as two nations united by a common purpose, we have demonstrated our determination to stand up against those who seek to destabilize and harm our societies.
Soldiers from both sides took part in intensive joint training, including urban warfare exercises, combat drills in mountainous and complex terrain, and the exchange of best practices, while also enhancing their physical fitness, firing skills, and field craft. Beyond the military drills, the troops also took time to celebrate Holi together. Japanese soldiers joined their Indian counterparts in the festivities, strengthening cultural ties and deepening mutual understanding between the two forces.
Well, moving on, restorers perched on scaffolding that reaches the ceiling of Rome's Basilica of San Pietro in Vincoli are working to bring new light to the church that houses one of Michelangelo's most famous masterpieces, the Moses. The basilica, named for the chains that supposedly held St. Peter in Jerusalem and later in Rome's Mamertine prison, shows a complex layering of construction phases from Roman-era remains to Renaissance decorations. The current works focus on restoring decorative elements and plaster on the side aisles and the transept, as well as the altars and funerary monuments. Funded through Italy's EU-backed post-pandemic recovery plan, the operation is nearing its final stage, expected in summer of 2026. And in sports, Indian women's football team face a must-win clash as they take on Chinese Taipei in the last Group C match of the AFC Women's Asian Cup in Sydney on Tuesday. The women in blue still have a chance to make it to the quarterfinals should they defeat Chinese Taipei by a margin of 2 goals or more, and if Japan defeat Vietnam on Tuesday in the simultaneous kickoff. India are currently bottom of the group at 4th place with 0 points from 2 matches after having lost against Vietnam and Japan. Chinese Taipei, on the other hand, have a much easier task. A draw will be enough for them to seal progression to the knockout stage. All right, that's all for this edition of DD India Live. Well, let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. For those on the go, you can get all the latest news and updates from India and across the world on the DD India mobile app. The app is available on both Android and iOS platforms. Scan the QR code on the screen to download now. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Lipakshi Khurana from Al Faser in Delhi. Thanks for watching DD India Live.